Time for another Bearded Wonder Explains. This time we are looking at the cost of production, some of these other factors that might go into price. So, supply and demand, competition and scarcity, these are all factors that determine price, but it's not as simple as just knowing one or the other. You kind of have to look at all of it. So, we talked about last time the fact that a Prius is not an Aston Martin. But even when it comes to the cost of production, a Prius might use cloth seats. The Aston Martin might use really rare Italian leather, right? They're not even using like the upgraded leather seats that might exist in America. The leather is of a totally different quality, and obviously the material cost of that's going to be higher. The Prius is probably rocking a four banger engine, whereas the Aston Martin's using a V10 or a V12, not to mention all of the other work that might go into it. So let's kind of break down the cost of production a little bit, and we'll say from the outset, this is an overview of the cost of production. We're going to get into a lot of the particulars about a lot of these things over the next couple of weeks. So if you feel like you're not fully understanding it, that's fine, because you're not supposed to. We're just kind of introducing the topic. So when we think about production, creating a product, in this case a Toyota Prius, the first thing that should come into mind is that there's a factory, and that factory has to create the Prius. And so you have the actual cost of the factory building it, right? And the machines and all of that kind of stuff. And that's part of the cost of production. There's also what we call research and development. In other words, somebody had to design this car and to come up with a plan of how it would be built. Somebody had to design the machines and everything else like that to put the assembly line together. All of that's what we call research and development. And so there are a lot of people and a lot of time that goes into designing these things, and that kind of has to be put into the price of the car. There's also the material cost. This is the leather seats and the upgraded engine difference, right? It's not the only thing, but it is another part. Obviously, if you're going to build a car or a sofa or a television set, the factory has to buy the materials in order to turn into those things, or to buy the parts from other factories who buy the materials. So if you're looking at your device that you're watching this on right now, you maybe have a glass screen. You have electrical components, you probably have some kind of plastic or metal case. All of these materials cost things, and they cost different amounts of things, which go into the price of the item. You've got your labor cost, and not just the people who work in the factory, but the people who work in research and development, and the people who work in distribution. In other words, after it's made, how do we get it to people who actually want to buy it? Well, if it's a car, you put it on a car carrier and somebody drives it across the country. That costs money. And then it sits at a car dealership, and a guy sits there waiting to sell it to you, and that costs money. You have to pay these people money to do those things, and that all gets wrapped in to the price as well, or to pay the people for research and development. You have overhead and maintenance, which means you don't just build a factory and then it runs itself. You need electricity, you need materials, you need other things like that. You have to pay taxes on the land that it's on. All of that's what we call overhead. It's basically, just to keep the plant running or air conditioned or whatever. That costs money, and that all gets put into the price of the products that are produced there. You have regulation, which is involved in literally all of this. There are laws that the government might make, like a minimum wage for the labor. Maybe there are other laws that have to do with materials and how you get them. Maybe global warming initiatives and the amount of emissions that can come out of the car or the factory that makes the car. And it costs money to follow those rules. And that money all gets added to the price tag of the vehicle too. So if you look at what you actually pay for a car, you're not just paying for the glass and the metal and the engine. You're paying for those things, and that's part of it. But you're also paying for regulation compliance. You're paying the salaries of the people that made the car, or at least part of it. You're paying for the health care that the government just mandated that everybody give to workers. You're paying for the factory, you're paying for the overhead, you're paying for the distribution, you're paying the salesperson's commission, you're paying for the research and development, all of those things. And what that leaves over is what we're basically calling the profit margin, which on cars is extremely low. And the reason why is because there's competition. But this also limits the ability of competition to bring a price down. Ultimately, companies have to make money. There's no point to having one if it loses money. Nobody starts a company to give away money. That's called a charity. And so if you have a company, you're there to make money, and so that profit margin, depending on how competitive the market is, that profit margin is going to be pretty small in a lot of competitive markets. If you have something like cars, where there are a lot of different companies, there's a lot of different options, people are going to cut into that profit margin as much as they can to pay for everything else. But that's going to stop them from making tons of money. So you might think that Ford Mustang that you bought brand new at the dealership for $36,000 made the owner of Ford rich, but that's probably not true. He maybe only made a couple of dollars on that transaction, and his wealth comes from volume, in other words, the number of sales, rather than the actual profits that he's making. And these changes can have a ripple effect, right? So if the government makes a law about cutting down trees for global warming and they increase the price, you have to pay a tax for every acre of land that you clear. Well, that's going to make lumber more expensive. And when you make lumber more expensive, you make the facilities and the buildings that are built more expensive. And that means that the car that you buy at the dealership is going to get more expensive. And so we have to kind of understand that a lot of these laws that are created end up just adding to the price tag of the things that are made and bought. Also, all of these factors are still kind of subject to their own supply and demand. And so it's not just as simple as figuring out what the supply or demand for a Prius is, although that's part of it, but literally the supply of laborers to work in car manufacturing plants and the demand for those laborers controls the price that they get as salaries. And that controls how much of the price of the Prius pays for the labor portion of the production cost. And so supply and demand of all of these different parts of this basically supply chain are going to have influences and ripple effects. It's kind of like throwing rocks into a pond. One economic change, it's not as simple. And so as you're looking at your chosen project throughout this course, I want to encourage you to take kind of a broad view. We're going to look at some of these other ones specifically as well, like government regulation. That'll be its own thing. Labor costs, that'll be its own thing. But I really want you to gain this perspective where you understand that prices of houses don't just go up based on supply and demand of houses. They go up based on the supply and demand for architects. They go up based on the supply and demand for materials. They go up based on government laws. You raise the minimum wage, and everybody making minimum wage gets more money, and that means everything that they do gets more expensive for their company, and their company makes things more expensive to buy. That's just economic reality. You add taxes on businesses, and they add that price to their stuff, and so purchasers are the ones that ultimately end up paying for almost all of this. because normally, if you look at this chart, the profit margin is very small. In a competitive market, that's just how it has to be, because the sellers take off the price and still, like, to a level where it's worth it to make money, but it's pretty close to the bottom that they can accept and still have a business. And so when you add at any point in this supply chain, they're going to add to their price, which is going to be passed on to a consumer, not to any other part of the supply chain. That's it for us today. Like I said, we're going to look at this certain aspects of it more in depth. So hopefully you feel like you have a pretty good overview of how a supply chain might work. And look forward to seeing what you come up with this week for your project. Hope you have a good day.